Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros. It is Drew here, and today I'm going to be doing my review of Switchback at ZDT's. So Switchback is a gravity group wooden coaster. It's actually a shuttle coaster, meaning that it doesn't do a full circuit and it actually goes backwards for part of the track. And this is the only one of its kind in the world right now, and it is located at ZDT's amusement park in Seguin, Texas, just about an hour outside of San Antonio. So to get to this coaster, you go through the entrance, you take a right, you go out through the door, and boom, you're there. It's simple as can be, and pretty much half the park is this coaster in itself. You have an arcade, of course, and some like jungle gyms inside, and a little food area as well. But besides that, I mean, you have the drop tower and a frisbee ride, and then there's Switchback. And it's just, it takes over the entirety of the space of the park, which is not a bad thing at all, because you get great views of this ride from anywhere in the park and even in the surrounding parking lots. Now, a striking feature of this, besides its sole spike that you end up going up and down on, it is a steel structure, a steel support structure with wooden track, which is not normally something that a lot of people would see out of a typical wooden coaster. Granted, this is not a typical wooden coaster. It's a pretty fantastic wooden coaster though, for sure. And it is a wood coaster because it does have wood track primarily, even with the steel support structure. You could call it technically a hybrid, but I don't know, it's still technically a woody. But this ride looks fantastic from pretty much every angle. It's so compact and so just fun to watch, especially with how it goes forwards and backwards through the same layout. It's an amazing little ride, and I would love to see more models like this. I'm excited about Kentucky Flyer and Oscar's Wacky Taxi and Wooden Warrior, and they're just all really great looking rides. But Switchback is kind of a step up from those, I would argue, just because of how intense it really is. But anyways, let's go to the ride itself. Now, the first thing that you would notice when you go into the station, you actually have the exit and entrance on the same side. There's no real barrier between the two. Actually, if you really wanted to, you could just go out the same way from the entrance and then turn around immediately and then just get back on. If there's no line, of course, which there was no line the entire time I was there. I went on 5 times, and I actually did that pretty leisurely. I was not going on immediately after every time I got off. I was actually usually taking a 1 or 2 ride break just to chill out and look around at the scenery of the rest of the park. But now let's move onto the train itself. Get in your seat and put down your restraint. Now, this is actually my first ever gravity group coaster, so I've never been in a Timberliner. They have really nice Timberliner trains, especially with its lead car that's very nicely done to look like an old steam locomotive. Now, the first thing that you notice when you sit down in these seats is how padded they are and how comfy they truly are. I mean, this is probably the most comfy seats that I've ever had on a coaster, besides possibly Apocalypse at Magic Mountain, but that's padded to heck and back. Besides that, the Timberliners are amazing. The seats are fantastic, just padded all the way around and super comfortable. Now, the one problem I do have about the Timberliners is the restraints. Now, I wish the restraints were a little more forgiving, like they had more bend to them, because on the actual part of the restraint that touches your body, it's pretty flat. I mean, it's got some curve to it, but I think it needs a little more curve to be more comfortable, because with how it was hurting my hips a little bit when I'd actually get the restraint pushed down with some of the forces on the ride. So that's my only complaint about the Timberliners, though. Everything else is super comfy. The restraints just, I think, need a little more work and maybe need to be a little more giving, but that's just a personal thing. So let's get this ride going. Immediately out of the station, you have 2 right turns that actually give you some pretty nice laterals, I'll be honest. And then you go up this chain lift, which is actually pretty slow moving for the most part. It's not the quickest chain lift, but that's completely okay. And then immediately after you exit the chain lift, you have this really tight turnaround. I know the Timberliners have a completely tight turn radius, a tighter turn radius than a lot of coasters, besides possibly just the Raptor. but I'm not entirely sure on those numbers. But then you hit probably my favorite drop on any wooden coaster. It's just steep enough, and especially in the back row, you get crazy ejector airtime. It's really awesome, as well as some laterals coming down on the drop, because it does kind of turn to the side a little bit, which I love that. Ejector plus laterals is my favorite. So especially in the back row, it is fantastic as a first drop. Then you go over this quick straight section, which is actually a brake run for the end of the ride, but we'll get to that later. And then you have this lovely pop of ejector airtime no matter where you're sitting, and then even a push of laterals to your right, so you get this fantastic ejector airtime. And then immediately after that, you get a head chopper from the building you're going through. It's crazy how tight this thing is, but it's amazing. And then immediately after those head choppers and the ejector airtime, you get into another ejector airtime hill, which also gives some great ejector. And then you go into this beyond 90-degree bank turn, which is one of my favorite parts of the ride, because going forwards it's super intense. And immediately after this, you go under another building, and then up through another little pop of floater, a left turn, and then another pop of floater, possibly even ejector if you're in the back row. And then you go up the famous part of the ride, the spire, the spike, the tower, whatever you want to call it, realistically, where the train stalls out, loses all momentum, and then goes backwards. It's very picturesque. My only problem with this spike is that in the back row, it doesn't feel like you're going straight up necessarily. You're close to it, but it doesn't feel like it. But in the front row, it feels like you're going up hang times chain lift for sure. But yeah, definitely one of my least favorite parts of the ride, believe it or not. Just not too exciting, just maybe a nice little bit of floater, but that's about it. There's nothing really too much else to it. I do wish that the train was going possibly a little bit quicker so you could get a little bit higher up on that spike to make it a little more exciting, but that would be my only complaint really about that. And then you start heading backwards. Now, on some of these airtime hills, it's not really ejector anymore. Possibly some good floater, but it does lose a significant amount of speed once it stops on the spike and then goes backwards, which is okay, because going backwards, I think if you're going through those airtime hills at that intense a pace, I don't even know what I would be thinking. So then you just traverse backwards through the track. Now, if you're sitting on the right side of the train, it is honestly really, really cool to go back through the overbank turn, which actually the clearance is insane. Once you're starting to go backwards, you notice how tight that clearance is. There's a walkway. If you stuck your right hand out, you would lose half of your arm. It's pretty freaking amazing. I love that. I don't think you'd actually lose half of your arm, just to let you know. It just looks like it would, because perspective is a thing. But I love the way it looks, especially when you just turn your head slightly and you're like, oh, that's really close, even though it probably really isn't. But then you go back through some of the layout, and those two main ejector hills give you some nice little floater as you're going back. And then eventually you hit this straight section of track, which is what I was talking about earlier, which is actually the brake run. So you actually get slowed down going backwards. Once you hit that, you go kind of a quarter way up the first drop, and then you stop on the brake run completely until a switch track moves over and you get rolled back into the station. It's a really cool thing to watch. And that is the entire ride of Switchback. It's an amazing gravity group coaster. It's an amazing wooden coaster. It's an amazing coaster all around. It is one of the most intense, tight little circuits that I've ever been through. It's just a lot of fun. I was smiling the entire time I rode it, every time I did. And I get absolutely excited just talking about it. It is definitely worth your time to go to ZDT's, to drive the hour, and then spend the $20 or so just to get into the park. If you ride it at least 3 or 4 times, I would say it's worth it. It's just a fantastic little woody, definitely worth the time. Now, I can only wish that they'll be getting a new coaster soon, but rumor is that they might, at least in the next 3 or 4 years, so I'm excited to go back, actually. Hopefully I might go back next year. You never know, especially with how my travel schedule has been. You never know what's gonna happen. So I'm really excited to even possibly go ride this thing again. I can't wait to go ride the other gravity groups that are opening in the next couple of years and that have opened in the past couple of years on the East Coast. And I love this thing so much. And I gotta give it this. This is my final rating for this ride. It is a 9 out of 10. And there's just nothing I would really change besides possibly getting it to go a little bit faster, but not by much. I mean, the only way that that would happen is if the first drop was probably another 5 feet taller or so. And that's the only thing that could make it better in my eyes, at least with the current layout. And it's a fantastic wooden coaster all around. It's just intense. It's got great airtime and some really, really great turns as well. But I love this little thing. I hope we see more models like this on the West Coast and all around the US and even Europe and everywhere else. It's possible. It's just, they're fantastic. Gravity Group does a great job, and it makes me more excited for every other Gravity Group out there, especially when I get to ride some later on in the next couple of years, hopefully. But if you've ridden Switchback, let me know what you think of it down below. And of course, as always, we'll see you on the next ride.